Hey again, welcome to King's Baptist Bible College, lesson 10. And anybody know what lesson we're on tonight? Everybody got a hint, right?
Yeah.
I may not get through Hannah and Samuel, because there's a lot of material in there, a lot of different personalities. And of course, we're going from the book of Joshua, which was almost a book of total victory, to the book of Judges, which is almost total defeat. And it's sort of a sad book when we look at it. Judges. The book of Judges in our English Bible comes from the Latin word Liber Judicum. Liber, book, think of library, liber, and Judicum, judge, justice, judge. The Hebrew word for judges is shophatim, and it's very related to the word mishpat, which is justice. And I heard it said, you cannot have justice without judgment, or vice versa. If you're going to have judgment, if you're going to have a judge, you have to have justice. And we would think it's very cruel or unusual if somebody went into a daycare and killed all the children, and the judge would let them off scot-free. With wickedness, there has to be judgment, or else there is no justice. And when we look at our lives, we all are sinners. We all fall short of what God wants us to be. And if He judged us by our own works, we'd all fail. None of us match up to Christ's likeness. And again, I say the Bible is a constant book pointing towards the perfect sacrifice, the perfect judge in this case that we're going to look at. And later we're going to look at the perfect Redeemer. Who wrote the book of Judges? Well, it doesn't say in itself, but most scholars and the Jewish Mishnah and Talmud all say Samuel wrote it. Said he wrote it maybe somewhere between 1050 to 1020 BC, and it covers from 1380 BC to 1350 BC. So after Joshua died was around 1380 or so, and when Judges is finishing up, when Samuel and Hannah and all them, Eli, it's around 1050, 1020, near 1000 BC. To whom was it written? To the Israelites that were in the land. The Bible says it's for our learning, for our warning, for our encouragement. So sometimes we see these bad things happening so that we don't do the same thing. It shows you what happens, warning versus compromise. And Judges 3:7 says, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and forget the Lord their God and served Balaam and the groves. So here's a basic, you had it in your book, you have a diagram of the map, but here's basically where the judges were at. You see Shamgar on top, Elon, after Elon Musk, or the city of Elon, or village of Elon. You got Jarrett, Gibeon, Jephthah, Tola, Ehud, and some of them, you think, well, what is a judge? We think of judges today like Judge Judy or somebody like that, right? If I say a judge, the world will say, oh, Judge Judy, or I don't know all the judges out there. But that's what a lot of people think of judges. Well, a judge in this time was probably more like John Wayne, going in and cleaning up a town, cleaning up a territory, going fighting off the bad guys. For the most part, it was more of a military leader. God would, the people of Israel would, like I said, that chapter 3, what it said they forgot God, they served Balaam. The people disobey God. Remember last week we did Mount Gerizim and Ebal, the blessings and the curses. Well, God said, if you follow me, I'll bless you. If you don't follow me, I'll curse you. So, and of course, he started out light. I'll withhold the rain. And we're going to see Why did Naomi and her family leave Israel? There was a drought, right? No rain. Why? Because they weren't obeying God. But then God says, if you don't, then I'll bring in the oppressors. I'll bring in the enemies. And God raises up evil people sometimes to discipline his children. And we don't always like that. I think it was Obadiah, I'm not positive, was complaining about the children of Israel. And then God said he was going to use the Babylonians to discipline them. No, God, the Babylonians are worse. He said, well, I'm going to hold them responsible for what they do too. In here, we're going to look at basically 12 military reformers, a bloody butcher, Abimelech, a spoiled idolatrous son, a cowardly Levite, a Moabite girl, a dedicated mother, a undisciplined priest. And we're probably not going to cover those last ones. The circuit riding preacher, the undisciplined priest is Eli, and the circuit riding preacher is Samuel. So we're probably going to not make it through that way. But you look at the book of Judges. See what I wrote down here? God moved in spite of themselves. God showed them that, hey, you are my people. I'm going to keep my promise in spite of yourself. I mean, they turned over and over and over again. And God, if you want to use the expression, bent over backwards to help them. He brings discipline. It's like your children. Well, you don't want your children sticking their finger in an electric socket. I was doing some electrical work around the house, and my grandchildren were over there, and my grandson wanted help, but I got a 3-year-old Brianna that she wanted to help everything. So I let her hold the flashlight, and I was teaching my son my grandson how to do one of the outlets, put in a new electric outlet and all that, and I told him how to turn it. You turn it so it goes with the screwdriver when you tighten it and all that. But she was keeping that flashlight over. I said, Bree, keep it down here so brother can see. But you want to try to teach them early. You want to try to discipline, but you want to teach them. Sometimes there's a school of hard knocks, and Judges is basically a book of hard knocks. We're going to look at, and who are some of these reformers? There's Othniel, Jehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Barak, Gideon, Tola, Jareth, Jephthah, Zibban, Elon, Abdon, and Samson. And some we have a lot of information on, and some we have very little. It just says, and there was rest. And we'll go over some of those. We see Othniel started out. Anybody know who Othniel was?
Well, it says right there, he was the son of Caleb.
And he's also the younger brother. And Caleb, Caleb and Joshua were the what you say, if you want to call them the star Christians of the Old Testament. I mean, these were the two guys that believed God even against giants. And Othniel, they're fighting Kereth, and he says, whoever takes the wall, whoever is that first one in battle, the one who's the bravest, the one who attacks, can have my daughter as a wife. And his younger brother, hey, I like my cousin there. That was before some of those things changed where they stopped allowing it so much. But he up over the wall and got himself a bride. And so he was and that word Cushathrium, that's up north, Assyrians. Well, that word Cushan means, that first part means wicked. I heard somebody say, and Rishon Theum is like basically between the rivers. And they think he may have had a treaty with the Israelites, but he was a double-crosser. Some people call him a dirty double-crosser. He promised them one thing and then backed out on it. But that Cushan in Hebrew means wicked. So he was probably very oppressive when he got the control. We see Ehud. It said he was oppressed by Moab for 18 years, and then there was 80 years of rest. He assassinated a fat Moabite king named Eglon and organized Israel into fighting with 10,000 army troops. And we'll go over each one a little bit more. Shamgar, oppressed by the Philistia of Philistines, and killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad, and not much more is known. Now, anybody remember anything particular on Samson when it was talking about Samson, or let's say Saul, and King Saul and Samuel. Anybody remember what the Philistines had a monopoly on? The ironworks. They didn't have any blacksmiths in Israel. They sort of got them out. So you had to take your tools down to Philistia to get sharpened. But God raised up people who didn't need iron weapons, bronze weapons. This guy killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. That's a little stick, pointy stick that you use to get the oxes going. You goad them. You know, you ever hear the expression, he's goading me into something? Well, ox goad is just basically a stick with maybe a nail on it or it sharpened. And if the ox wasn't moving along fast enough, you poke it in the bottom to get it to go. So that's what an ox goad is. So he killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. So he's a pretty tough guy. You see Deborah and Barak, or Barak and Deborah. You know, some people put Deborah first all the time because she was a prophetess. Says she judged them. We don't, it seems like if the men won't do what they should, sometimes God will use women. I mean, look at America today. How many women are the spiritual leaders in the house for a lot of people? It's sad. Guys, some guys don't even go to church. So God used Deborah. It said they were oppressed by the Canaanites for 20 years, and then they had 40 years of rest. He also raised up an army, fought a general named Sisera at the base of Mount Tabor, and he was killed by a woman with Jael. We'll go more in that in a minute. Gideon. My one teacher called him super chicken. I mean, he's threshing wheat in a wine press. Now, anybody know what threshing wheat is? Well, yeah, you take a shovel, a fork, and you throw it up in the air so the wind blows it. Now, if you're down in a wine press, you're probably not going to get a lot of wind. So they were hiding because what happened is the Midianites were like air raiders. They came in on their camels, come in, take all the food, go back out. They didn't occupy the place. They just came in, raided during harvest time, took all the grain, the grapes, the barley, the wheat, and okay, let's head back home till next year. And so they're hiding, putting the stuff, they're doing it in a wine press, and of course you hear the angel of the Lord say, how are you doing, mighty man of valor? Sort of sarcastically. I mean, this guy, the mighty man of valor, was hiding down in a wine press. And then you see Tola, 23 years. Other than that, you don't know much more. Jared, they had rest for 22 years. We don't know exactly how long they judged, but he had 30 sons. And he delivered 30 cities. So some of these men, and we don't know if Judges is sequential, in other words, one after the other, but it seems like this judge might have been over in this part of the country. This judge might have been some overlap, stretches in between them. So we don't know exactly if it's sequential. So Judges is basically giving you what was the condition like in Israel at the time of the Judges. It was pretty bad. And just because they didn't trust God. You see Jephthah, son of a harlot, oppressed by Ammon for 18 years, then they had 6 years of rest. His family kicked him out because he was a son of a harlot. They said, well, and it just shows you the problem with many of these mixed marriages, or in this case, I guess, not marriages. And his people said, hey, get out of our city. And then he sort of gained a band of thugs maybe with him, or, people that were sort of oppressed too. And then when war happened, when the enemies came in, hey, can you come back here, you good warrior, you? Isbon, 7 years of rest. Elon, 10 years of rest. Abdon, 8 years of rest. So there's not much. And we had Samson. Everybody knows Samson. The big Hulk of the Bible, right? Well, probably not. I mean, excuse me, we don't know exactly what he looked like, but if he had muscles like the Hulk, nobody would wonder where his strength came from, right? He was probably, remember, this guy caught, how many was it? 70 foxes, 30 foxes? A Hulk isn't, remember when he burned down the Philistines' field after they killed his wife, or well, when they gave his father-in-law gave his wife away, and he caught these foxes and tied them by a tail and released the foxes, put a firebrand in between their tail and released them into the fields. And then what did the Philistines do? They came back and killed his wife and his father-in-law, and I gather her husband and whoever her father gave her to. So I thought you hated her because you took off. Samson is on the rash side. Then we have Abimelech, one of Gideon's sons. Again, we don't know exactly how many wives Gideon had, but he had 70 sons. And I'm assuming he had, some of that money came from all the golden earrings that Ishmaelites, remember he said, we want to make you king. Well, no, just give me everybody his earring. The Ishmaelites wore earrings, and they had golden ornaments and necklaces on their camels. He said, well, just give me all the golden earrings. Well, how many Ishmaelites did they kill? Anybody know? Over 120,000 Ishmaelites. So you imagine 120,000 golden rings, and then all the things off the camel. So he made out pretty good on money-wise, I think. Probably, maybe $1 million in today. I don't know exactly. And then Abimelech set his kingdom up in Shechem, and later he was judged by God. He was wicked. He claimed himself king, so he claimed himself as the first king of at least this section of Israel, not the whole country. Then you have Micah, a mother that spoiled her child. So she pronounced a curse on somebody stole all of her money. I'm pronouncing a curse on that thief. Mom, it was me. Oh, bless you, son, for telling me. And what did she do? She gave him money, and then he made an ephod, made a statue to worship. And he wasn't a Levite, but he ran into a Levite for hire from Bethlehem, going around. Well, I imagine they probably weren't taking too good care of the Levites at this time because they weren't really serving God like they should. And so they were out freelancing, just going around, hey, you need a priest? I'm a Levite. You pay me a little bit. Oh, hey, why? This one's going to offer me more money, Would you rather be a priest to a person or a whole tribe? So he was a priest for hire. Not your most, do we see some of that today on TV? Probably. And we see a cowardly Levite where he goes and, the guy he stayed with offered his daughter and his concubine to these men that wanted to rape the guy. But notice he didn't give his daughter. He wanted just giving the man's concubine, and she died because of the abuse. And what did the Levite do? Cut her up. Scott, how would you like to receive a head in a bag, or a hand, coming to the house? Said, wait a minute, this is awful. And then all the tribe, what's happening here? And it got their attention, that's for sure. And they came and said, hey, Benjamin, you need to give us those men. No, they're part of our tribe. You can't have them, even if they're wicked. So we start out, Israel fighting all these enemies, and by the end of Judges, civil war. They're fighting one another. So we see, what are some of the failures of Israel? You had religious compromise, which leads to moral corruption, which leads to civil catastrophe. I can't remember, but there was a philosopher, a guy that came over from France, and he was trying to figure out the greatness of America. He said he looked in the halls of Washington, and he didn't find it there. He looked in the great military. He didn't find it there, but said when he went to the churches, then he found out why America was so great. He said, America's great because America's good. And he said, when America stopped being good, they'll stop being great. And so religious compromise led to moral corruption, which led to civil catastrophe. God says, if you sin, you're going to lose God's blessing. If you obey, you'll receive God's blessing. Again, the blessings and cursing, what Moses said. You follow me, I'll bless you. You disobey me, I'll curse you. And here's just a look at some of the imperfect judges. Ehud was left-handed. right? The Latin word for right hand is dexter. If I say, oh, Chris is very dexterous, he has a lot of dexterity. What does that mean? He can use his hands well. Well, anybody have a guess what the word for a left-handed person is? Sinister. So if I say, oh, that Scott is sinister, that means you're left-handed to Latin, but they didn't always trust the left-handed person. So right-handed is dexter and left-handed is sinister. We see Barak was reluctant. We see Deborah said, hey, God told me that you need to go and deliver Israel. Well, Debbie, if you come along with me, maybe I'll go. She said, okay, I'll go. But you're not going to receive the honor. It's going to come to a woman. Because you don't want to obey God. Remember, she said, God said for you to go. And he's making conditions. So he doesn't receive the honor that he would have by winning the victory, because the general, Sisera, was, might I say, nailed to the floor. We see Deborah, the woman. God will use women sometimes if men aren't going to do what they should. And Gideon, we mentioned him. He was a coward, threshing grain in the. And if you we'll look at it later, but Gideon used a lot of if or doubt and fear. He didn't really believe God. And we put out words today like, I'm throwing out a fleece. Well, that's not really very biblical. Throwing out a fleece is not a sign that you trust God. And what happened? He said, okay, God, give me this sign. Put the fleece out in the morning. If it's wet, I think it's right. If it's wet in the morning and dry around, then I'll take that as a yes. Well, what happens? Morning comes, it's wet. God, let me flip another coin. Right? Let me flip another coin. Now, if it's dry and the ground's wet, and then what happened? Next morning, well, I guess I got to do it. And then he told him to go tear down his father's. And Jephthah, son of a harlot, not your most socially upstanding guy, right? And Samson. I mean, we all know the story of Samson, adulterer. I mean, he had a problem with women. Now, the strongest man in the Bible comes from the weakest tribe, Dan. And we're going to look at it a little bit. Then you had some of these judges that we don't know much about, other than how long the rest it was. Judges 21:25. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. You know, they say dictatorship is better than anarchy, because then everybody's shooting anybody they want. You know, it's better to have maybe an oppressive government than no government at all, because then you could imagine mobs going around just, if I had a bigger group than you, we'll take your stuff. And so everybody did what was right in them, and it didn't say they thought it was wrong, right? They said, well, this is okay. They thought it was right, but according to God, it was wrong. They thought, there's no big deal with me doing this, right? What's the big deal of men marrying men, right? Well, God says it's wrong. They thought, hey, that's okay. I can go to a Canaanite temple and, go to the temple prostitutes, right? That's okay. I mean, we got to make the land fertile, But they were doing what was right in their eyes, not what God said was right. And God judged them for it. And listen to what it says here. Now the children of Judah had fought against Jerusalem and had taken and smitten it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. And afterward the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites that dwelled in the mountains and in the south and in the valley. Verse 12, and Caleb said, he that smiteth Kirjath-sepher and taketh will I give Akshah my daughter to wife. And Othniel the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it and gave him Akshah, his daughter to wife. Verse 19 and 20. And the Lord was with Judah, and he drave out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. And they gave Hebron unto Caleb, as Moses said, and he expelled thence the 3 sons of Anak. And the Bible said they didn't, they said they didn't follow me fully. We'll see right here, again, Manasseh couldn't drive them out. Inhabitants of Bethshan couldn't drive them out. Why? Because this next verse tells us. Judges 2:1. And the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim. Anybody remember what Gilgal was? If you remember the book of Joshua, Gilgal was where they camped when they came across the Jordan River. And who did Joshua meet when he was doing a night run? The angel of the Lord, right? Well, here, again, the angel of the Lord come from Gilgal. He's coming from the place of victory, from the place of success, and he's going to Bochim. And Bochim means weep, to weep. Here's what it says. And I said, I made you to go up out of Egypt and have brought you into the land which I swear unto your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and ye shall make no leagues with the inhabitants of this land. Okay. One, they made a league already by mistake, right? And it looks like they're making others. Ye shall throw down their altars. What did he say? But ye have not obeyed my voice. So they go in, conquer the land, but what are they doing? They're leaving up their religious stuff. We don't want to be too intolerant, right? We can worship our God, and we can let them worship their God, right? We don't have to be so narrow-minded. Well, God said no. Because you're doing it, they're going to be a thorn in your flesh. Listen to what it says. But you have not obeyed my voice. Why have ye done this? Wherefore, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your side, and their God shall be a snare unto you, a trap. And what do we see? Later we'll see in Israel, they're worshiping Baal. They're worshiping the other gods. They're not even worshiping along with the God of Israel. As a nation, the northern kingdoms all turned away from God. They had no good kings. You have Jezebel. She put up had all these prophets to Baal, and they worshipped other gods. And said, because you're not throwing down their altars, you're making leagues with them, I am not going to drive them out. They defeated them initially, but then they're coming back. Because they said they're going to be a thorn in your side. You might want money. Well, we want you to work for us. We want to get your money. We want you to harvest, build, and we're going to take a tribute off you. As opposed to killing them and getting madder and tearing down and burning up their trophies, their statues and all that, they let them, and he said, and it came to pass when the angel of the Lord spake these words unto all the children of Israel, that they lifted up their voice and wept. Bohi, wept, to cry. Like said, my one teacher said, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. They wept, they cried. And they called the name of the place Bochim, and they sacrificed there unto the Lord. Well, they sacrificed unto the Lord, but what happened? It doesn't look like they changed much. It's like, oh, God forgive me. I've had a lot of my relatives, they get in trouble, physical things or whatever. If the Lord gets me out of this, I'm going to go to church. We all know people like that. Or, yeah, I'll go to church with you, Chris, next week. How many times I had a guy at work, I don't know how many times he said, yeah, I'm going to come to church visit you. I'm still waiting. So nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges. And notice that verse, nevertheless. In spite of their disobedience, God still loved them and cared for them. He raised up judges to deliver them out of the hands of them that spoiled them. And yet they would not hearken unto their judges, but went a-whoring after other gods and bowed themselves down to them. And they turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments and orders. But they did not. In other words, their fathers who came across the land pretty well listened most of the time. But, of course, on the other side, the ones that died in the wilderness, they didn't obey either. And you see a cycle happening here? Okay, they get in trouble. Oh, God, help me. Okay, here, I'll send a judge. Ah, good. And while that judge is alive, they obey God. The judge dies. We can go back to our stuff. He's gone now. And then God has to send in another enemy. And, so they returned and corrupt themselves more than their fathers and followed other gods. So they said they became even worse. I mean, that shows you the condition of the book of Judges. You just see cycle after cycle after cycle. The first cycle, we see Othniel and the Syrians. And he was a pretty good judge. I mean, he came from noble lineage. But what was the problem with Israel? They followed other gods. They intermarried with the women of the land. They gave their they gave their daughters to the Canaanites and the people in the land, and their sons took their wives. So God sent, the first one was Cush-Rashaim Wicket from Mesopotamia or Syria. They oppressed him 48 years, and then he had rest for 40 years. Ehud, a left-handed judge, he made a dagger about 18 inches long, about the size of my arm, roughly. And he goes in and said they were oppressed for 18 years, and evidently at one point, Ehud had to be the one that took the tribute to Eglon. So he said, hey, he'd come down, and they're down in the valley of Jericho now, down in the Jordan Valley, in the valley of Jezreel, or not valley of Jezreel, but they're down in the Jordan Rift Valley, down low, down where Jericho is. And Jericho may have been a warm, nice place. This Jericho happened to be Herod the Great. That's where his winter palace was. So when it was cold and stuff up in the mountains, and Moab, if it was wintertime, it could be cold too, because it was higher than the other side of Jordan, because that was Transjordan. And Eglon was down here at Jericho, the city of palms. And you say, well, it doesn't get much water, but because of the rain on the mountains, they had a lot of natural springs and oases down there. So they were very well watered. Just to show you some pictures, this is a date palm. You ever look at some of the pictures of Jericho, you'll see, I saw hundreds and hundreds of palms. I'm assuming they're planting them because they were straight like planting corn. And that's what some of the area looked like down in Jericho. Beautiful, beautiful area. If the kids were there, grandkids there, I'm sure they'd be swimming, in it. I probably would be too. But you get that cool water before it goes down into the Dead Sea. And it was a nice place to winter. And Eglon was down there. And it says that he made his, the Bible verse says, I'll make his enemies thy footstool. Well, imagine this. Eglon, a very fat man, right? Big. Well, what the thing was, even Pharaoh had a footstool with all the countries he defeated pictured on the footstool. So what would happen is if you came down, you'd come before Pharaoh, or in this case, Eglon, and what would happen? He would take his big, fat foot and stick on your neck. You'd have to bow down, and he'd put his foot on your neck. And that's what the expression means when I'll make thy enemies like footstools. In other words, you're going to conquer them, and they're going to have to bow down to you. And Eglon, Ehud probably had to do this. And he probably got tired of it after a few years, right? And he said, hey, I got a message for you, a secret message. Hey, you guys, everybody out, just Ehud. He probably was thinking he was going to get a bribe or get some extra money. And they probably frisked him. They probably frisked his, because you'd grab your sword and go out like this. Well, he had his sword on his other side because he's left-handed. He pulled it out and said the Bible said he came in, so he probably came down like this, cutting right through the guy, and said he stuck the dagger in, and the fat basically closed around it, and he couldn't pull the sword back out. I mean, this guy was big, and you figure 18-inch sword, that long, he rams it right into him so far that the hilt's stuck in the belly, and he can't pull it back out and take off with it to use it as a weapon. So he sort of takes the key off him and locks the door and says, hey, the king's busy. He's going to the bathroom right now, so just don't bother him. The Bible says he had time to get away, and they were like, where they became basically embarrassed, like, boy, he's in there a long time, and then they finally get another key, open it up, and by that time, Ehud runs home, says, hey, I killed King Eglon, let's go fight him, and they won a great victory there. Again, you had Shamgar that fought against the Philistines and killed 600 men with an ox goad. We don't know much about him, other than he judged them for a while, and they had rest. Deborah and Barak. You had sort of a lack of male leadership. A woman's having to be the judge. You had no one really cared. That's part of life. You can't do much with it, right? Then you had Jabin, the Canaanite. So Canaan was sort of up northwest of Israel. So you had the Syrians up here, but the Canaanites were down here, and there was a few other ones spread out around. And so Jabin might be a title, maybe not a name. Like Caesar was a person's name, but then it became a title also. And said he oppressed Israel for 20 years, and then he had 40 years of rest. So we're going to see Sisera went to fight against him, the general. And anybody remember how many chariots he had when he went to fight? 900 chariots. Now remember, a chariot is like a tank back then. And the Jews didn't have it. And so Sisera brought up his artillery, his armor, and it says, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, when Ehud was dead, and the Lord sold them back into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, to reign in Hazor. And Hazor was far up north. And initially, remember, Joshua burned that city. But again, a city gets destroyed, and what happened? Okay, let's go back and rebuild it. Let's rebuild it. I mean, what happened here before? Wall fell. Well, you rebuild it. Scott's the builder. Something happens, you rebuild it. A deck gets too old, you tear it down, rebuild it. And back then, they didn't, dig up the foundation, put a basement in like we did, for the most part anyway. But they just built right on top of it. So you have layer after layer after layer of some of these ancient cities. Some 20 times or more they found that they've been through destroyed more than 20 times. But this is the Kishon River. Now, if you look up here to your far left, that's where Mount Tabor is. And imagine a gumdrop setting on the ground. Mount Tabor sort of goes up like that. It's like not like a peak, Pikes Peak, but it's like a small mountain. And remember, I said Israel has a lot of dried riverbeds, right? Anybody remember what they call them? Starts with a W. A wadi. So they have a lot of these dried riverbeds that, because Israel has most of the rain for 3 months, right? And down here where Barak and them was, so somewhere along this river they were fighting, and they were going to fight up in that far left-hand northern part. This is a picture of a flash flood in Israel of one of the wadis. And down along the coast, they say that in the tourist coast, every year, many people come down to watch these type of flash floods come down the river. And so many people die because they're standing in the middle of it, not expecting the water to be that fast or that strong, and wound up dying because of some of these flash floods. If I remember right, the stats were 20-some people a year die. Because it's like Crabtree Falls. Don't go out on the rocks. Oh, I won't slip. I don't know how many dead has died up there now. But then we see God brought a rain. And what happens with chariots, if you took a truck out muddy, especially if it wasn't a four-wheel drive, what happens? Gets stuck in the mud. They were putting in a new reservoir where we lived. And us, mild, meek teenagers, we went out there on a Saturday when they weren't working, right? Climbed the cranes and everything, climbed way up top on the cranes. But, my buddy lost his shoe because his shoe got stuck in the mud. He pulled his foot out because we sunk so deep in the mud that his shoe came off and he couldn't find his shoe. And he was worried about getting stuck more, so the chariots got stuck in the mud. God sent a flash flood, and the Bible talks about it. And then we see he runs, right? He runs away. But Jael got the nail. I think I told that to Matt the other way. Jael got the nail. Said she walked over daintily. Now, could you imagine this? This guy been fighting all day. God sends a rain and causes the chariots to get stuck so they can't use them. And Israel has the high ground. They come down, so they have the advantage now. And Sisera's army's losing. He takes off running, because if you had a chariot and it was working, you would stay on the chariot because it goes a lot faster than you can run. Well, he takes off running, and he runs, we don't know exactly how far along down along there, and he's so tired, and he runs into Jael, Eber's wife, and they were sort of like, oh, we don't have anything against the Jabin, and we don't have anything against the Canaanites and the Jews. We get along with everybody. We're just out here feeding our flocks and wandering in the wilderness, in the desert, in Jezreel. But here's what it says. They fought from heaven, and the stars in their course fought against Sisera. So did he bring hailstorms, ice? We don't know exactly what, I'm not sure exactly what it means. The river of Kishon swept them away, that ancient river Kishon. So looks like they had a flash flood, and it killed many of the army, Sisera's troops, in the flash flood. And then the horse hoofs broke by means of their prancing. So they were stuck, and they're stomping, and they broke their hoofs, and probably a lot of them drowned also in the water. And Sisera takes off, he goes running. And look what here it says, verse 23. Curse ye Mazor, said the angel of the Lord, curse ye bitterly the inhabitants there, because they came not to help of the Lord, to help the Lord against the mighty. In other words, some of the Jews, that's Matt's problem. Let him fight him. I'm not going to help them. They're leaving me alone. I'm letting them alone. Remember what happened in Germany when Hitler took over? Well, he's not touching us, so he's only touching Jews. But we're okay with that. And then what did he do? He came for the Christians later. I mean, they thought, well, we won't get involved. We won't help because he's not bothering us. Well, God says, cursed be Mayros, and that's a Jewish city. So they didn't come up to fight. So the Jews, the different tribes, didn't always come and help. Remember, we'll see in Gideon, when he was chasing after the Midianites, Ephraim came later after he was winning, said, how come you didn't call us to fight? I mean, well, and of course, Ephraim was the biggest tribe in Israel on the northern side. And he said, well, you did more than we could do. Okay, I mean, Ephraim seemed to always have an attitude problem. That's when I read the Bible. And what happened? Now we see Gideon and the Midianites. You have desert raiders, they come in, and the problem was, camels, you could come in quick, do a lightning raid, and be back out. A horse could be a little faster for the while, but a camel can drink water, and they can last longer. So that was a problem with some of these Arab raiders. They would come in, attack a city, and take off, and by the time you organize a force to go after them, it's too late. And they know all the oases in the desert, so they knew all the water places. And so they would come in, boom, hit a raid, back out. Boom, hit a raid, back out. They did that even in more modern Bible times, in the New Testament time, and they'd just come in and raid. We see they oppressed Israel for seven years. They had 40 years of rest. He was from the tribe of Manasseh. He said, I'm from a weak tribe, and that's true, and I'm from a weak family, that's true. And he says, if or fear. I imagine God said, well, good, that's a guy, so I'm the least in my family. Well, good, that's the kind of person I'm looking for. So if I send out your strong guys, they always take the credit for themselves. Okay, God, so he throws out the fleece, and God answers it, which I was sure he probably hoping he wouldn't. He said, okay, God, I got another thing for you to do, Gideon. You're going to go, I want you to tear down your father's idols. What? Now, first of all, what tribe was Gideon from? See it up there on the tribe? Manasseh. Is that a priestly tribe of Israel? No, but what's his father doing? He's a priest of Baal, right? His own father's a priest of Baal. I mean, how low can you go? And he said, okay. He said, go and tear down the idols. And then sacrifice that 7-year-old heifer, right? Well, what does he do? This brave guy, he gets other people to go with him and goes at night. And in the morning, what happened? Who tore down our idol? Well, I imagine one of the guys said, well, Gideon told us to do it. You know. So they come to Gideon's house, bring out Gideon and kill him. And his father probably thought, well, finally somebody standing up for God. And I wonder if his father got convicted. He said, well, let Baal take care of his own revenge. If Baal's a god, let him strike down Gideon. And I think maybe his father turned back to God. Maybe he was convicted. You know, we don't always do what's right. And he cut down the grove, and now they're going to have the battle. They're going to Hill Moreh and the well of Harod. Now, if you look over here on the map, the Midianites were pretty far away. You know, and Gideon said, okay, I want everybody. God said, you got too many men. So he had how many men? 32,000, right? And what do we see later? They killed 130,000 Midianites. Plus, I think in the city, they had, 15,000 more, if I remember right? Well, I think I have it written down here. But, so 22,000 against 130,000 is not a very good odds. Remember, they didn't have probably the best weapons, and they didn't have where, like, the U.S. could shoot, you know, send some rockets down, and, you know, one rocket could kill thousands. They were hand-to-hand combat, so the more men you had, usually it meant the better chances you had of winning. So get in. If you got too many men. If anybody's afraid, tell them they can go home. Well, if anybody in their right mind would be afraid. So what happens? 22,000 people leave. Whew, thank you, Lord. They were probably really thanking the Lord. They take off, right? So now there's 10,000. Gideon? Yes, Lord. Still have too many people. What? I mean, now they're 1 to 13, right? If I count that right, you know, you have too many people. Okay. Go down to the well, go down to the pool, and I want anybody who laps up the water, you know, like a dog. I want you to keep them, send everybody else home. The ones who just stick their face down. Well, people say, well, the ones who lapped it up were the cautious and wise ones. Well, the Jewish rabbi said these were the cowards that were so afraid, even though the Midianites were far away, they were still worried. So he sent them away. So God's putting in a situation that he only can get the credit. So what do we see of Gideon, right? He was in the wine press, and what happens? He says, okay, I want you to divide the 300 people up into 3 groups and spread them around the Midianites, okay? Give everybody a trumpet, a shofar, a ram's horn probably, and give everybody else a clay pot and a torch. Now, if I was coming to fight you, Chris, you had a sword and a shield, I am probably missing something, right? I know I'm coming at nighttime. You may not. So if I have a torch, you know I don't either have a sword or a shield, right? And if I have a torch, you know I'm missing again a sword or a shield. So you're not going to be in the best fighting situation. So he said, surround it. And he said, Gideon, are you still afraid? Yeah, Lord, I'm afraid. Okay. Take your servant, Purah, I think if I remember right, Purah, go down to the Midianite camp, and you're going to hear something down there that will encourage you. Yeah, Lord, I need some encouragement. I need some encouragement there, Lord. So he goes down, and they sneak into and I imagine that Midianites weren't super cautious as guards, because they got 130,000 soldiers, and they know Israel only has 22,000, 30,000. So they know so they're not really worried, and they know Israel's pretty far away. Well, they're talking. This one guy, they're sitting around the campfire, probably drinking their coffee or tea or whatever, you know. They said, Hey, I had this funny dream last night. Yeah, well, what'd you dream? Well, I dreamt coming down this hill, there's a barley cake. You know, and that's probably what Gideon was threshing, right? There's this barley cake rolled right into the Midianite camp and just knocked all the tents over. And God put this in the one Midianite, an unsaved person, said, that can't be anything else but the sword of the Lord in Gideon. Said, he's given Gideon, he's given us into the Gideon's hand. Now, could you imagine the talk that went around the camp? Hey, did you hear what Bill said? He said, Gideon's going to kill us all. Now remember, the Midianites were what? Arab raiders, right? And they had the Amalekites with them. So they might have spoke Southern, you know, a lot of the Southern. So they may not. I had a roommate. I had this friend. He was very old friend. He was very Southern. You know, remember I told you about the guy I visited at nursing home? He was 100. He lived to be 114. Very Southern. Hey boy, saying and talking. Well, my roommate couldn't always understand him. He said, what's he saying? What's he saying? And I had to sort of translate for this guy. And imagine you're in a group with all these different tribes or different groups. Remember, they're nomads. They're wandering around. So they may have not understood, like, you know, Scott or Matt or Chris or Janice or Kim or Joyce. You know, they may have not understood one another. So remember, and it's nighttime. So God says, hey, go around, and I want you to, all of a sudden, I want you to blow the trumpets, wake them up. Now, I had a son, well, both of my sons are not the easiest to wake up. I don't know about, I get up like that. But my two sons are very hard at waking up. And he said, Gideon, I want you to surround them and blow the trumpets, and then I want you to smash the clay pots. And of course, what would happen? You'd see the torch, right? So imagine waking up in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden you hear this crashing sound that sounds like armor or people marching, and you hear all these trumpets blowing all around you. Because remember, you're probably going to have one trumpeter per maybe 1,000 people or whatever, and you might have one torch for every 1,000 or 100 people, and you're waking up in the middle of the night, so you're not the most oriented, because they probably didn't set watches per se, because they probably weren't afraid. And all of a sudden, they jump up and they grab their weapons. It's dark, and they run into somebody. Whoa! And you speak a little different than I do. Whoa! I got him. Then you run over here and somebody kills him. You know. Oh! So they're killing one another off. I mean, and the Bible says that they basically massacred each other. And God said, "Hey, I want you to know that I gave you the victory." And then what happened? Hey, we're winning. So all these 22,000 guys, hey, wait, hey, and remember, there are probably going to be a lot of spoils there, right? A lot of things to take after the battle. So all these other ones jump in, and the Bible says that some of them were hidden caves earlier from the Midianites. They probably heard about it. They came out, and then the Ephraimites, hey, I guess there's free loot going on down there by the Kishon River. So they all go running down there and ready to defeat the Midianites. Let me get through this. Then you have Abimelech. I said there's a lot of stuff in there. Abimelech, he was the one who, Joshua's, Gideon's 70 sons. He was sort of the harlot son, and he killed all his brothers and made himself king. And we're gonna skip through some of this. Tola and Jared. We have Jephthah, the son of the harlot, and listen to what it says. Now, Jephthah was Gilead was a mighty man, but he was a son of the harlot. So his brothers kicked him out. So you're not going to live with us. Well, look at Judges 11. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed over Gilead and Manasseh. And so he came over and won, right? So remember, he makes a vow. In your reading, you read about his vow about whatever comes out of my house, I'm going to sacrifice to the Lord, right? Well, there's two views on that one. One, that he gave her over to serve in the temple, and two, that he actually sacrificed her as a burnt offering. Well, first of all, there's certain things you couldn't sacrifice as burnt offerings. Like if you had a lamb that was lame, and it was a firstborn lamb, you had to substitute another lamb. You couldn't give that lamb. You broke the lamb's neck, you gave it to the Lord, but you also had to give another one. And one, the Spirit of the Lord. So personally, I don't think that he killed him. Because remember, they bewail her virginity. If he was filled with the Spirit, why would God tell him to do something against God's will? Especially, he's given him victory over the Ammonites who commit child sacrifice. So, there's arguments on both sides. And that word said, whatever comes out of my house, the Hebrew word could also mean or. Like, I'll give it whatever comes out, or I'll do a burnt offering. And typically in those, he probably thought an animal was going to come out, because many of them, the animals lived in the lower part of the house, and the people lived in the upper part of the house. So he was probably expecting an animal to come out. Because they would keep goats and sheep and everything in their house. The Philippines, they carry pigs and roosters right on the buses. I mean, over there they would have cockfights on Sunday. So when we were going to church, we were riding the bus in some of the barrios we were at. People would be carrying their roosters that they were using for the cockfights on the bus. They'd be carrying their little pigs, their little calico pigs. I had this one that wanted me to keep scratching its ear when we were doing a Bible study at a little village. And every time I stopped, he would make all this noise. And he laid right beside my leg when we sat on the ground. And I had to scratch his ear the whole time, or else he wouldn't be quiet. So it wasn't nothing uncommon. Then we see Ibzan and Elon and Abdon. But now we get to the big guy, the strong guy, Samson. What was the advantage Samson had in his life? He was dedicated to the Lord from his birth. Evidently, he had a godly mother and father, but the Philistines, the sea people, were starting to take more and more land in Israel. We see a little bit about them when they came in Abraham's time, but now they are starting to migrate in mass. So they're getting more and more territory. And it said they oppressed them for 40 years, and they had rest for 20 years. Samson, his name means Shimshon, or sunlight. As one of my professors said, you can call him Sunny Boy. Hey, Sunny Boy. But his name, Shimshon, means sunlight or bright one. His father was Manoah. He was from the town of Zorah, and he was from the tribe of Dan. And you notice it said that in the camp of Dan, they sort of even lost their inheritance already. And later we'll see that they'll migrate north. And when you talk about from Dan to Beersheba, Dan eventually moves all the way north and finally takes land there. But they're sort of a wandering tribe we'll see from the Levite. And what happens here? He said he shall be a Nazarite. Anybody know what three conditions for a Nazarite?
Can't cut your hair.
Okay.
Cut the hair.
You can't drink wine.
Okay, well, that drink wine, there was more to than that. Here's what it said. Nazarite vow said, do not drink wine, anything of the grapes. So we're going to look at that in a minute. What's verse, what's this, can somebody read this verse for me? Who'd like to read it for me? So what's wine according to this? The juice. I said it's hanging there. So sometimes we think today the word wine, and we think alcoholic. Well, the Hebrew word and the Greek word can be alcoholic or non-alcoholic. We see right here, it means grapes, the juice of the grapes. So when people say wine, you can't drink wine, here's what the Nazarite vows said. Well, here's what Nicander, he's a Hebrew Greek scholar, said, Annas had squeezed the juice into hollow cups, called it wine, oinos. And the Greeks, as well as the Hebrews, called fresh juice wine. And that's from Knott's book. And he was a Greek Hebrew scholar. And the word wine, well, I think I have it in here. Let me get over here quick, because we know we don't have much time. I guess maybe I didn't put it in here. I guess I'll have to get it, and we'll probably go over this a little later. But according to the Nazarite vow, You couldn't touch grapes, drink wine or strong drink, and that could be concentrate too. We think strong as being more alcoholic, but back then wine was probably the most alcoholic thing you could get. Most beers back then were only 6%, because it depended on the yeast it had and the sugar content. And if it was any more than that, it said most of the wines were probably only 6% back then. So I did a lot of study on this, but you couldn't eat grapes, raisins, or anything made out of the kernel of the grapes. So grape seed extract you couldn't have. And Samson had a problem with women. He saw a Philistine woman down in Timnath. Dad, get her for me. Remember they had to have the arranged marriages. We might have to stop here in a little bit, and then I'll probably pick more of this up. But it's a lot of stuff. And he says, a woman, he lingered in a vineyard. Samson did. What was in a vineyard? Grapes. And what did God send to the vineyard? What did Samson kill in the vineyard? I think, personally, that God was trying to get Samson's attention. Samson, you shouldn't be here. This is grapes. Now, you're not going to find wine there, right? Drinking wine, fermented wine. The vineyard, you find grape juice. And I think God was trying to say, Samson, get out of here. That's part of your vow. You're not supposed to be touching the grapes. You're not supposed to be eating the grapes. I imagine he probably looked at it. And I have grapevines. And I make homemade juice and jelly. And it smells so good. And he probably, that smells good. And then God sent a lion, and he wound up killing the lion with his bare hands. And what did he do? What did he get from that lion later? Honey. Was the lion dead? So what other vow did he break? Touch the dead thing. And then when he killed all these Philistines, after they killed his wife, what did he use? Jawbone of an ass. Another dead thing. He was constantly pushing the line. And then he went down to Gaza to see a harlot. And that's way down in Philistine territory. And the Bible said they closed the city gates and said, we'll get him in the morning. Well, he got up at midnight, comes down, grabs the city gates and rip them off their hinges and carries them many miles and put them on a hill. And people say, well, what about the guards? Well, if a guy could rip and carry 4,000 or 5,000 pound gates, I'm not going to fight him. Right? I mean, I'm going to get out of his way. Go ahead, buddy, you go. And but he was constantly pushing, like, I have nothing to worry about. I'm Mr. Macho, I'm the Hulk. And he constantly didn't worry about the places he put himself. And then Delilah, he met a woman, Delilah, in the Valley of Sorek. Now, it doesn't say she was a Philistine, but she probably was. And he was 20-some years by this time later, and she was probably an older or wiser woman. She wasn't going to be easily impressed by Samson. She was probably a woman of the world. She was what they call street smart. She knew what was going on. And we'll go ahead and stop here right now, but she was very... she knew when Samson was telling them the truth. My one teacher, he used a southern accent. Sammy boy, Sammy baby, tell me how could I go about binding you? How could I tie you up? Well, you use new thongs, leather ropes that never been used before. I'd be as weak as any man. Samson, the Philistines are upon it. He goes out. Sammy, you lied to me. Come on, tell me. How can I bind you? Well, get some ropes that have never been used, and I'll be as weak as anybody else. And what happened? Samson, Philistines, you lied to me again. Well, notice the next one. Well, if you take my hair, notice he's getting closer and closer to the truth. If you take my... Now, we think Well, how come they wouldn't say that right away? Remember, there was a lot of Nazarites around probably. So they had long hair and they weren't super strong. So, will you take my 7 locks and weave them into your loom, and I'll be weak as anybody. So he falls asleep. This guy slept pretty good too. I mean, he was a solid sleeper, and he may have been drinking more alcoholic wine too. We don't know. But she says, Samson, the Philistine, and he jumps up. He breaks her loom. Now she's bawling and crying. And say, you broke my sewing machine. Get out of here, you beast. But sweetheart, I love you. No, you won't tell me your secret. You won't tell me. Babe, come on, babe. Hey. And then finally, after nagging, she just went on. Okay, I'm a Nazarite, and I made vows to God. And if I cut my hair, I'll be as weak as any man. And the Bible says that she said, he told me all his heart. She knew when he was lying and when she was telling the truth. And finally, he told her. And what do we see? He comes, she has a barber come in while he's sleeping on her lap, cuts his hair. She said, the Philistine, and she said, come on down. He told me the truth. Now this time they're waiting for him. And they took him and gouged out his eyes, probably with a hot poker. Now he's blind. So, and we're going to go ahead and stop right there, and we'll finish up more.
I don't understand how anybody could sleep that soundly. It's really,
Well, now,
I mean, you're doing your hair, or however they did it in that day. They didn't have razors.
Well, they did have like squeeze razors that you
But
cut it. So
even then, I mean, if you're asleep,
Well, the dude that got the nail drugs in his head. I mean, how?
yeah.
well, that's just
asleep
like
can you
Cicero
be?
sleeping there. I mean,
Well-
I know she gave him a glass of milk or something.
Yeah.
She gave him something like
Well,
that.
it's probably kefir.
But still,
Yeah.
to put that thing through his head.
But you got to remember, he may have been running all day, and just can you imagine fighting? Can you imagine fighting for hours?
Oh, my.
I've had it where my hands actually, I couldn't open my hand. My hand clung to a hammer from working all day. I don't know, Scott, if you ever come across that, where you take the tool out of your hand's still going like this, and you just feel so tired. I mean, I always worked a full-time job while I was in school, and sometimes 2 jobs, and I took a full load in school. I mean, I only was sleeping. Some days I only slept 2-3 hours, and I would fall asleep on the couch, and my wife could vacuum, and I would sleep through it. She said neighbors would get in fights, and one son, dad and his son, or the girl's boyfriend, and she goes, "Did you hear that last night?" I slept right through it. But once I sleep to a certain point, then I wake up like that, easy. But we'll get into the rest of this later. Let's pray. Dear Lord, again, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your love, Lord. We pray that we might learn from all these things, Lord, that warnings that we might take in our life, and Lord, how you do bless when we call unto you and obey you. Now, Lord, be with us tonight. Help us as we go on our way to glorify you, and we'll just thank you and praise you and ask this all in Jesus' precious name. Amen. I didn't think I'd get done with most of it.